And welcome to the meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee for Tuesday, February 2nd, Groundhog's Day. So the agenda is exactly the same as it always is. So basically, we have to identify any potential conflicts of interest. Anybody see anything on the agenda that might be a conflict? There being none, we'll move on to the citizen comments. Are there any citizens that want to make comments? There being none, we'll move on to the consent agenda, the minutes of the January 19, 2021 meeting, the monthly position control report, bills and payroll, November Treasury report, December Treasury report. What's your pleasure? Motion by Spiros to accept, second by Paschal. Discussion. Just one thing, Jen, it looked to me like we have something like 14 vacancies. Is that correct?
They're not all vacant. Some have been internal transfers, but we do have a number of open positions currently.
Do you know how many?
I can tell you quick. I believe it's 9.
9. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to accept the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Item number 7, the request to recommend the council approval to refill vacant positions in the library. That item has been pulled from the agenda. And so we're going to move on with item number 6. Request to recommend council approval of training center agreement with Mid-State Technical College presented by Scott Owen. Scott, welcome back.
Thank you very much. All right. Back in 2006, the city entered into an agreement with Mid-State Tech related to the training center at 2615 South Vine. That was a 10-year agreement that has since expired. There's a renewed interest between our department and Mid-State Tech to renew that agreement. Mid-State has included in their annual monies for prop improvement, building improvements, things that we need. And with that, there are, I believe, 3 or 4 members of Mid-State that are available on Zoom to answer any questions you may have of them. Otherwise, this would be for a 10-year contract. The opt-out clauses are in there just like they were. It's pretty identical to to the last contract we had. This was presented at the last Police and Fire Commission meeting and passed unanimously. And I guess with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions and ask for your approval so we can put it on common council.
The agreement is in your packet. Are there any questions? What's your pleasure? Move and second to approve. Moved by Spiro, second by Paschal to approve. And Mr. Handler, was that? That was a second. Oh, that was a second. Okay, thank you. Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. This is originally signed in 2006 for 10 years. Said that there were some extensions, I guess, possible. Is that what I'm understanding?
From the original one?
Yes.
When the contract lapsed in 2016, it just kind of went by the wayside between our changes at the department, their changes at Mid-State. It just kind of got lost by the wayside. So
we've had no contract for 4 years?
Not in those 4 years.
Okay. Yeah. And why did this sudden, you said there's interest now again? Why the sudden interest?
So there's a couple of reasons. On our end, it's to improve the facility, to make it more useful, not only for our department, but for the police department as well. They use it for SWAT training and that type of stuff. On Mid-State's side of it, they are looking to expand fire training up in the northern end of the county. Currently, most of the training is centered down in the southern portion. They are actually in discussions not only with us, but also Stevens Point at creating fire training centers at the 3 main campuses so that training up here can happen without having to travel 35, 40 miles away.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Are you ready to vote? If so, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And, okay, number 7 has been deleted. We go to number 8. Request to submit a revised job description for the position of administrative specialist, human resources assistant to the city compensation consultant for review. Jen, this is you.
Thank you. So recently we have done a review of the administrative specialist, HR assistant position. We haven't updated this job for a while. It was last updated in 2016. As you're aware, we are in process of putting in new software, both financial and human capital management system, as well as payroll and recruitment. And so as we reviewed the software and as it rolls out, there is going to be hopefully some good efficiencies created by that software. So as we looked at the position in general, we wanted to look at capacity and look to see what might be able to fill that capacity. In looking at the job description, there's 3 job descriptions in your packet, and there's 3 because it's pretty, the red line version is pretty extensive. And so it was just easier to give you a hard copy as well. A clean copy as well. But ultimately, the key changes that we're making to this position, one is just a clarification point. The majority of this position, while it reports to the mayor, the city administrator, and myself, the majority of the work right now has been human resources related. And so we wanted to call that out as part of the job description. Currently, the position is responsible for leaves, primarily family medical leaves and workers' compensation. What we're looking to do is expand the duties in that and really make the process a little more robust. But that would include things like military leave, unpaid leave of absence, some of the COVID tracking, which has been pretty heavy in this past year, so that we would kind of have a one-stop shop instead of the shared role that we have now. That is to say, though, that if we do have significant leave issues, I would certainly still be involved with those. This position has been working over the course of the past year on an I-9 audit from a compliance standpoint. What I'd like to do is transfer all responsibilities of that I-9, an annual audit, and the maintenance of those documents to this position going forward. There's also an annual non-discrimination report. It's an annual benefits report that gets submitted that we're including. We have had a number of open records requests in this past year. We'd like to include the assistance of open records requests in that role. And then we've actually expanded the taxi duties. Some of the positions or some of those duties related to the share ride taxi had been in finance, and we're looking to move them all into one person so that it's a little bit more cohesive. So with the increased level of leave responsibilities in general and the I-9 compliance and the other things that are listed here, I feel it's necessary to submit it to McGrath for a compensation review. So at this time, staff is requesting approval to submit the revised job description to McGrath Human Resources Consulting to see if a compensation adjustment is needed. I'm certainly happy to take any questions that you have.
Rebecca.
Jen, can you refresh my memory? Is there a charge to submit this to McGrath?
Yep, there is a charge, $130 per evaluation.
Thank you.
What's your pleasure? Rebecca? Is there a second? Mr. Handler, second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
And the next up is request to recommend council approval to refill 3 vacant positions in the street division presented by Steve Barg, city administrator, Dan Kamenek, director of public works, and Chris Hawley, street superintendent. We have a trio.
Microphone on. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm going to make just some opening comments and then I'll turn it over to Dan. Tonight, you'll be asked to authorize refilling 3 vacancies in the street division. In recent months, as I think you know, Street Superintendent Chris Hawley has been before you a number of times, fairly often with such requests. And at recent Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meetings, committee members have questioned a little bit, wondering maybe why the turnover in the street division, what's creating some of that. So in a minute, I'll turn over to Dan. He'll be addressing the turnover issue in more detail, but there's a few things I just want to pass on from my perspective as city administrator. There's obviously many reasons why someone chooses to leave any job, not just with the city of Marshfield. There's, they might relocate to another city. They might find opportunities with more pay. That happens all the time, people that we can't compete with. So there's obviously a variety of things that drive that. But having said that, I'm picking up some information I'm hearing from different places that our staff, including our younger employees, are watching where things are headed in terms of our compensation and benefits. Our staff in general was encouraged when the council adopted the new compensation plan back in 2018. We worked on that with McGrath from Northern Illinois. But with the pay scale having not been increased in the last 2 years, including the 1% adjustment that had been budgeted for 2020, staff is questioning a little bit our commitment to the plan. Staff also pays attention to some of the comments made at council and committee meetings. They're trying to gauge, I think, a sense of the degree to which they feel that the elected officials value them. Now, I realize that a few council members were not on the council when this plan was adopted 3 years ago. Others have questions and concerns about the plan, very valid ones. But this is something we need to address and soon. I think Councilmember Spiros, you brought up the issue of public and private pay comparison, which is a really, really good question. There's other good questions that have been come up in terms of how this plan works. But I think we need to dig into this before we start headed down the road toward the 2022 budget and get a handle on where we all are here. So to start down this road, I've asked the Human Resources Director, Jen Rakey, to make a presentation to the full council, which will hopefully occur later this month at a regular council meeting. And the goal of this is to see where we're at now and help us work toward an understanding of where we can move forward in the future. If it means tweaking the plan, if it means revisiting the plan, let's do it. Let's do it seriously. But so that we can all end up on the same page as to where we're headed. And with that, I would turn it over to Dan.
Thank you. So I had some of the similar questions on what's really happening with over trends in the street department. So I wanted to look into that a little bit deeper. See if we could shed some light on what's really going on. So some of these recent trends are that we are seeing some of our staff leaving to go to the private sector. And that's not something we've seen in the more distant past. We've seen retirements and so forth, but not transitions back to private sector. And for simplicity, what I've done is lump together all non-government employees at private sector, municipal, county, and state would be considered our private sector comparables, or our private sector employers. So I went back to January of 2018, so essentially 3 years and 1 month to see what was been happening. And in 2018, we had 3 vacancies in the street department. All 3 of those were retirements. And that's pretty typical from what I recall, 2 or 3 retirements a year, even prior to 2018. In 2019, we had 6 vacancies. There were 3 retirements, 1 internal transfer, and 2 to the private sector. So that's kind of the first hint of this trend of moving on to the private sector. And then 2020, we had 8 vacancies, 3 were retirement, 5 moved on to the private sector. And then just in January of 2021, the 3 we're talking about tonight, 1 was an internal transfer and 2 to the private sector. So to summarize that, in the last 3 years and 1 month, there's been 20 vacancies in the street department. It's significant. 9 were retirements, 2 internal transfers, and 2 to the private sector. So I was curious on those 9 that have gone to the private sector, how long have they been with the city before they made those decisions to move on? And of those 9, 2 were what I consider long-term employees, 7 and 12 years each with the city. But of that remaining 7, their time with the city ranged from only 2 weeks to just 3 years. And the average of those 7 was 16 months. So less than a year and a half for 7 of these folks who have decided to move on. And I started thinking, well, why is that? What are we hearing? What is the feedback? And Jen has done some exit interviews with guys. And so I think what we're hearing as a significant factor is the pay. We've been fortunate in years past to get skilled employees from the private sector. We've gotten operators, concrete employees, construction, guys with construction background looking to get off the road, being gone for the week, they get back home to their family. They come to the city, often taking a pay cut, not just in rate necessarily, but in their overtime by coming back to the city. And of course, there's a benefit to that, but it is a pay cut. They understood that we have a progressive pay plan and that eventually they can work their way back up pay scale. And when we don't keep up with that, I think that causes them to question, generate some skepticism. You know, how committed are we to our pay plan? A little bit of loss of faith in the system, and it's easier to reconsider whether that was a good decision or not. And we've learned that the 1% range adjustment was a big deal for staff this past year. We understand why it was done, but it does have an impact on decision-making. And there'll be a second year of no range adjustment in 2021 based on that adopted budget. That has been a factor. Another factor is that benefits are not as good as they used to be. The gap between private sector and public sector benefits has narrowed. And my perception of this is that the short tenure of most of these guys who have gone to the private sector indicates to me that the stability of long-term benefits is not as important to them as it was to an older generation. My perception of this is that the paycheck on Friday is important, and the ability to move up the pay scale is important to these folks that are coming on board with us. Another factor is I think sometimes the positions are not what they expected. I heard that just recently from one of our internal transfers, is that wasn't what they expected. And I think we've seen some of these guys who have been here very short periods of time using our employment as a stepping stone or a gap filler. We know of this past season of this summer, COVID, there's been layoffs and work reductions. We took on some staff that were, in hindsight, probably only planning to be here for a short term, using our employment as a stepping stone. That's my perception of it. We don't have all the facts and details, but it seems that way looking at how some of these guys have been here just a few months at a time. Another factor, although I don't think this one is a primary factor, but we have had changes in our leadership in the street division. In that same 3 years and 1 month, we've had 3 different street superintendents. If you remember, Mike Winch was still on board in the beginning of 2018. He retired early that year. Dean came on. He was here for just short of 2 years, and Chris was appointed to that position in March of 2020, so he's coming up on 1 year anniversary. Each of the individuals in that position brings a new perspective, new way of doing things, and it's adjustment for guys, to adjust to the new street superintendent style and so forth. Some of the feedback that Jen has gotten on exit interviews is that our communication could be better between leadership and staff, not just between street department or street superintendent leadership and staff, but from City Hall right up the org chart. I think we struggle with communication. I don't think that's unique to the city, but it has been a challenge this year with COVID. Shortly after Chris started, we went into our COVID protocols where we separated crews, we limited interaction, made that communication piece even more challenging. So one of my goals after kind of digesting all this, one of my goals for 2021 is to try to improve our communication within the Public Works Department and take a more active role in supporting Chris in that way. So this was just my first attempt at trying to understand what's happening over there. I think we need to continue working on solutions going forward, trying to address these types of issues and maybe other things as we continue paying closer attention to this. But this was really just the first step that I wanted to take to try to answer the question on what's happening. I think there's more to be done in this area, but with that, I think I'd like to, first of all, open up to any questions that you might have.
One thing that sort of struck me just from tonight's presentations, just from the 2 presentations we had so far, is this seems to be all the city's fault. And I'm not so happy about that. I don't think that. And it's true. Last year we did freeze the 1% raise, midterm raise in all of them. But almost everybody still got their 2.5% stip increase. I would have given them a 3.5%, which is far greater than anybody in the private sector is doing. and so I'm a little, nonplussed. I'm going to try and find a nice polite word for it, but, I'm a little upset about these things as they're presented now. When I saw that we had 3 more positions open, when I first saw this agenda, I think it was last Friday, I just blew my top. I really did, because this is something that has been going on. And you 20 vacancies. How big is the whole force? 38, 39 force, something like that?
With our leadership, though, we're at 30 individuals.
How many?
30.
30. And in the past 3 years, we had a turnover of 20. Something's wrong. And it's got to be fixed. And Dan, I trust you incredibly. I've known you now for 12, 15 years, and I've never doubted your integrity at all. But I think there's far more to this than going into the private sector. And right now, I'm looking at the 3 positions that are before us, and we're in the middle of winter, and I don't see how we can escape, because every one of these positions actually has some responsibilities in snow removal, as I understand it. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
I feel like I've almost got a gun to my head to fill those positions, but under normal, if it wasn't the middle of winter, I wouldn't. I would vote against it. But that I just want to let you know how I feel, and I'm not at all comfortable with this, with what's going on in that department. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Hendler, you had your hand up first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dan, you've addressed a number of questions that I had in your comments here. But I think it's awful hard for me to understand why a city employee would want to go to private industry, as Mr. Wagner indicated, because private industry is a lot leaner, than we are. So I think we have a problem, at least from my perspective. I don't know about the rest of the individuals. I think there's a culture problem over there that's been perpetuated over many years. And I think between you and Jen, I think you have to give some really close observation of what's really happening there. And I know that, you're somewhat removed. It falls under your jurisdiction. I understand all that. And I think we need to get to the bottom of this, because there's something seriously wrong in that department. What it is, I don't know. I've heard many rumors, but those are just rumors. I would support however, I would disagree with Mr. Wagner. I would support the 3 positions to be filled as soon as possible. And at the same time, I would ask you to come back to this committee with an in-depth, perhaps in closed session if you like, what's going on over there. We need to know that. And I think we're just playing around with the thing, a hug, hug, kiss, kiss, and make up. It ain't working. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question. You did discuss that that we've gotten away from the pay scale. How many times have we not given the raise that was scheduled to be on the pay scale?
Sorry, this will be the 2nd year in 2021.
So we've only missed it once, and this will be the upcoming. Okay, that's all I needed was clarification. I wasn't 100% sure on that.
Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. When Mr. Barg started his presentation, I don't know if I was spaced out or not paying attention close enough, but could you identify where the information that you presented had come from? Was that from exit interviews? Was that from man on the street rumblings? Where did that information come from?
I'd like to, but first I'd like to, if I can quickly address Chairman Wagner's comments. There's no intent by Dan or me or Chris, if you were to start speaking here, to place blame on the council or the committee. We're just reporting to you what we're hearing as part of the idea that you're asking why the turnover, which is a really, really good question. And a piece of it has to do with compensation. There's other factors. I know that Dan mentioned communication could be better, all the way up to the top with me and the things I communicate. So that blame is not the issue. We're just trying to share with you what's going on and work through some of this. But with respect to what I was talking about, Tom, it's mainly, information I've heard from Jen and exit interviews, things I picked up from conversations with Chris and a little bit from Dan as well. Not highly scientific, but there are indications that some of the recent people who have left have cited as one of their maybe, 2 or 3 reasons or whatever, the compensation issue. And they have flagged, in some cases, I understand, the fact that they're uncertain as to whether we're going to keep up on our plan that we've adopted. And they're making plans, especially younger employees are looking at the future. So that is a component. It is hardly the whole thing at all, but it's definitely a component that they're watching.
Okay. And I guess last time we had talked, it sounded like exit interviews weren't providing information, and now we have a lot of information. So I'm a little surprised by that. But as you had mentioned, it's one factor of maybe 2, 3 factors. Again, to see the full picture, it would be good to know all of those factors. It sounds like we're only getting part of the full total concern in regard to this turnover. So I think that, as Mr. Hendler said, is something that we need to address.
And I think Dan hit on a couple of them. The turnover of superintendents, different management styles, sometimes causes some upheaval a little bit. And certainly the fact that the communication that could be improved. And again, Dan said he could be part of it more. I know I could be part of it more. I've been challenged sometimes with how much I communicate with the employees in general. Do they have a sense where it's going on, or are they just hear through back channels that a pay scale adjustment's not happening? They should hear it from me, and they should. And I've not always been great at that. So I come back to the fact that this is not about blame. This is about giving you a sense of where we're at. As again, Chris comes before you with more requests for refilling.
Thank you.
Ms. Spiros?
Yeah, just a couple of points. Did you ever have a conversation with the employees about the financial condition of the city in general as to why we were not able to give that raise? Because I certainly would not want the employees to think that that was just a willful thing. Of course, we would want to give them a raise, but we had extenuating circumstances with this, with the budget. And do they understand that? Or, do you feel like the employees watch the meetings and they have a full picture of the financials of the city? Or do they really just take this very personal? Do you have any sense of that at all? Because I think that makes a difference. If they're taking it personal, I can understand that. That's not a good feeling. Like, my employers just don't want to give me a raise. But possibly if they understood the full picture, that maybe makes a difference to some people. And I just don't know if that's communicated well. Additionally, do we probably know some of these people. I'm sure these are some local people. Do we notice that they've left, the job that they've left us for? Are they just job jumpers? Because that's a common thing with this younger generation. They just don't stay at the jobs as long. So I think we have to factor that in too. That's maybe, something that we can't even fix. It's kind of seen all over the place.
We do not have a motion on the floor. Does anybody care to make a motion? That's the question.
I'll make a motion to direct the Director of Public Works to fill the Human Resources, fill the 3 positions that are vacant in the street division.
And a second by Mr. Wetzel? Okay, Dan, did you need to answer? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to address a couple of those. I do know employees watch meetings, and they pick up on the tone of the conversation and so forth. And that is a factor in how they feel about employment here with the city. I do know that the 2020 range adjustment was a little harder to swallow because that one had been budgeted, was included in the adopted budget and so forth. I think the 2021 range adjustment, being the difficult budget year it was easier to understand that. But now we're back to back in 2 years with no range adjustment. As far as tracking other employees, I'll defer to Jen on that, but I don't think we have a very good way of knowing what people do after they leave here. So
I do ask in all of the exit interviews that we do if they want to share where they're going. And so we do get a blend of scenarios. What I can tell you is that we don't have one employer locally that these people are exiting to. They're kind of exiting to multiple areas. You know, once in a while we'll get one or two that are going to the same place, but that's the harder part is if we had one competitor that would say be a manufacturer or something along those lines, it would be a lot easier to do that comparison, but they are really spreading out. And so some self-employment, some private employment, some, you know, again, just different scenarios. Some have gone back to the road. So that part is there. You know, with the exit interviews, just to address Mr. Witzel's question before, I do exit interviews and make those available to every employee who's leaving. Very few don't attend. In fact, of the recent scenarios that we've talked about, I think there are two that haven't, and I've got one that we've been playing phone tag of the most recent one that we're still finalizing. But other than that, you know, we get a pretty clear picture. What I don't always get is that we send a supplemental form with every person that doesn't exit to talk about anything that they're maybe not comfortable sharing in person so that they can, you know, put it on paper and send it back in the mail after they're gone, just as kind of one more catch-all. Those don't often come back, especially if we've had a pretty good discussion, but I do keep those as well and can go back and can find the information on all of these individuals. So the comments that Dan had made earlier in regard to the kind of the three common themes, those are three common themes, but the tangents of each of them vary a bit. So just to make you aware.
Any further discussion? Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. To address something that Ms. Spiro said, we may not be able to track post-city employment jumping, but do we take into consideration pre-city employment jumping? Do we look at a resume and say, boy, this person's been at 5 different jobs in the last 10 years. We really want to take a chance. They're only going to be here for a short time. And are those factors considered, or are we just looking at talent and bodies that'll fill spots?
I'll answer that first. That is definitely a red flag for me. I'll admit I don't get involved in every position that's selected at Street Division, but the positions that I'm involved with, that's a red flag for me if there's frequent job changing.
I can address that as well. We do look at job history and job hopping as one component. We also make sure that we do reference check with every former employer that is listed in the last 3 employers in their employment history, as well as their 3 personal references.
Any further questions? Mr. Barr.
Thank you. And going back to your question, Rebecca, I think that's a good point. It'd be hard to have watched the budget discussions and not picked up on the fact that we have a very stressful financial situation. I mean, we adopted a 7.4% tax rate increase. But I think they're also watching to see where they fit in. I know that some of the employees have been here for a while. You know, they've had some lesser increases, and that's where the McGrath study showed them behind their peers in other cities. So they're cognizant of the fact that finances are tough, but they don't want to take the brunt of it. They want to see some advancement made toward where the study showed that perhaps they should be. And they're maybe getting a little concerned as to whether or not that's going to happen even when we come out of this, hopefully. That's why I said maybe we take another look at the pay plan, and if there's questions or concerns, let's address them. But then let's make sure we can go forward with what we have to the greatest degree possible.
Ms. Spiros.
Yeah, this will be my last comment on this. I definitely think that it's very expensive to constantly have this turnover and be hiring new people. And we have to remember that also costs us money. So I would strongly encourage that Dan, you really dig into this, Jen, also. If we need to, send this to McGrath to be looked at, I would encourage you to seek that out and, to make sure that we're all okay with it, I guess. But it's really expensive. Turnover is very expensive. We don't want employees feeling that we don't value them or value the things that they bring to the city. I would hate for that to be the general consensus over there. So let's figure out what's going on. And if that includes going to McGrath, then that's what I would encourage you to do.
Any further comments? We have a motion and a second on the floor to allow the HR department and Public Works to fill those 3 positions. That's the assistant street superintendent, the fleet supervisor, and the inventory assistant / operator. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And the chair votes a rather grumbling aye.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you very much. Okay, Jen, you've got the next one up too. That's the request to approve the seasonal pay scale adjustments. All yours.
Thank you. So each of you were given a supplemental memo today to go along with the pay plan that was included in the packet. What I wanted to do is just kind of walk through some of the changes, because as you can see, there's quite a few changes in this particular document. Just so you know, we typically update this document every spring. However, we did move that up in the process earlier this year, and actually had that discussion following the seasonal pay plan rolling out last spring, and the fact that the earlier we go with this, the better it might bid for us in terms of attracting people to our seasonal jobs, where the influx comes in the spring. In addition, we have a primary coming up, and so with that primary coming up, there is a scenario for the election workers, and I wanted that was adapted, and the city clerk had requested that we go forward with that in advance of that election. So to give you a bit of a summary of the changes that are on this document, you're going to see, like I said, a lot of redlining on it. And some of the more significant scenarios is you'll see that level 1 is completely wiped out, and the positions in that position have been, or in that level of pay, have been moved to other levels. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we do have the new pool coming in with Bandahare Bay Waters, and with that caused some of those jobs to be reevaluated or changed into what we need to do. So there's 3 new positions coming in, one being a concession attendant, a head lifeguard, and then a pool and concession manager. So that is just one aspect of it. You'll notice that we also renumbered all the different levels of pay. Now, the front page of that seasonal pay resolution, really you can see is broken down specifically into 5 levels, the new 5 levels being redlined. If you look at level 1 and 2, the pay scale was increased by 50 cents an hour. For levels 3 and 4, the pay was increased by $1 an hour. And then level 5 had the most significant increase of $2 an hour, with the step 4 of that pay level increasing by $2.50. So while that may seem high, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One is the seasonal park tech position does sit in that role, as well as the 2 kind of highest level of responsibility positions that we have in the Parks and Rec. I did go out and request information from various communities, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, Wausau, and looked at their comparables. And so in looking at those, as well as getting some information from some of the department and division heads in regard to some local assessments that we've looked at as well, a seasonal parks technician in general falls anywhere between $11 an hour and $29 an hour, depending on which community you're looking at. And the average pay rate, you'll see in the paragraph below, for a seasonal or temporary part-time employee in our local community is ranging between $10 and $15 an hour. So with that, that's part of the driver in terms of looking at these, fairly drastic pay increases. Now, I do want to say that in looking at these scenarios, I did also talk to the recreation manager, and they did feel that they could absorb these into their budget and had planned for some hopeful increases for this year. One of the reasons why some of these positions are a little bit harder to recruit in Parks and Rec have to do with the fact of most of our Parks and Rec seasonal jobs are outdoor positions. And what that means is they don't have necessarily guaranteed hours. If they're somebody who works at the pool and it's raining that day, the pool's going to close. And so those those activities aren't going to be available, as well as, soccer or baseball or what have you. So just one of the things that we wanted to point out as a difference. Another change that you'll see has to do with the adult volleyball officials. This was an adjustment that we've had to look at. I know the recreation managers had a difficult time keeping and refilling these positions. So we were looking to increase each step by $1. In regard to the park superintendent positions in the zoo, you'll see that the zoo ranges have also changed, and that was really brought forward in terms of a recruitment and retention issue as well. In your memo, you'll see that the adjustments are quite high. One area for the intern and the zoo attendant going from $9 an hour to $10.50. From $9 to $10.50 to $10 to $13 an hour, you'll see that we want to remove the steps with those positions and make them into more ranges, so we have a little bit more flexibility, so we can retain the people that we have. In the zookeeper assistant and the education coordinator, we're increasing it by $1 at the minimum, and then between 50 cents and $1 at the top end, depending on which position we're looking at. Now, these positions did have adjustments last year in terms of the pay ranges. For the educator, we did increase just the top of the range in hopes of retaining the people that we had for a longer period of time. And the zoo assistant and intern were increased by $1 at that point. But still, the ability to attract and retain has been difficult for Ben. The seasonal forestry tech and the parks cemetery operations, we again want to make a range for those positions paying between $10 and $14 an hour. That's an increase of $1 at the minimum and 50 cents to $1 at the maximum of the range. That's the same scenario with the street positions that come in for the summer. We'd like to increase those from their current rates to $11 to $14 an hour. It is $1 an hour increase, but again, if you look at local comparables, working in our street division versus Target or Walmart or Menards, they have a potential to earn more money than what we're offering right now. Finally, you're going to see some asterisk changes. You can see that the adjustments were increased at the top of the range and the amounts per year. Again, hoping to retain individuals in those positions. And those asterisk type positions are typically Parks and Rec roles. Last few, engineering division, the city engineer had requested an increase of 10 cents per hour for his positions. It's a pretty minimal increase, and the competition that he faces a lot of time is with the Wisconsin DOT, which pays about $2 an hour more than we have. So it's certainly a lower end increase. Technology, in that position, we do have our document processors. We're looking to increase their range from $8 to $11 to $9 to $15 per hour. Again, this position hasn't been increased in the last 8 years. And so we have some document processors that have been here in a part-time or seasonal capacity for that long. And so we want to be able to continue to adjust their wages as we go. And then finally, the city clerk, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is looking to increase her election inspectors to by 50 cents an hour to a rate of $10 per hour. That would be all of our election workers, with the exception of our chief election inspectors, would all be paid a flat rate of $10 per hour. So with that, I'm certainly happy to take any questions. I know some of our leaders are available to answer for their departments as well.
Questions? Well, first, can I have a motion? Mr. Handler, that a motion? Is there a second? Mr. Witzel? Questions? Dan, I just got one question. Have all the departments budgeted for these increases? I mean, is that money there, or are we going to create a deficit situation?
We do ask that question as we go through the pay increases, and the managers that I've spoken with have indicated that they had room within their budget for these adjustments.
Well, they have room within their budget, but did they know about these increases? Or did they anticipate these increases?
I think most of the departments had. I know Deb in particular had, Parks and Rec had, street division, I believe had that as well. Parks and Rec and street division usually go hand in hand with some of their increases in regard to their parks maintenance and their street maintenance.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? It carries. Suggested items for future agendas. Anybody got anything? Well, I guess we got Dan coming back at some time. I don't know if it'll be in the next. But, anybody? Staff have anything? Okay. With that, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.